In this video, we're going to spend a little bit of time learning about descriptions. A description is written or spoken illustration of a physical object, but you knew that already. So when would you need to write a description or speak a description? There are a lot of different situations. Maybe you've billed a customer for a part and they ask you to describe what it is. Maybe you've got an employee and you want them to use a particular piece of equipment, but they don't know the name of it, so you have to describe it to them. Maybe you're describing a part to a supplier, or maybe you've invented a piece of equipment and you're describing it to potential investors. Now, before you begin your description, it's important to know what kind of audience you have: the technical, the semi-technical, or the non-technical. If you're talking to a technical audience, that audience needs specific parts, numbers, readings, measurements. This is the audience of your peers. This is someone who understands the equipment or the part or the procedure as well as you do, or better. They know the acronyms, they know the vocabulary, and they don't need you to give them a whole bunch of background information. You may also write or speak to a semi-technical audience. These are people who understand most of what you know. They know the basic acronyms and some of the technical vocabulary. They'll probably still need some specific measurements and descriptions, but they may also need some background information. And finally, you've got your non-technical audiences. These are people who really don't know a lot about what you are describing. They need you to describe the object or the procedure in simple, plain English, regular speak. They're not going to understand acronyms or technical vocabulary. And they're going to need a lot of background information, basic definitions, and analogies. You're probably going to have to explain things to the non-technical audience that it didn't even occur to you to mention until you started talking to them. When working with non-technical audiences, try using analogies or metaphors. I do this all the time when I'm teaching. I might tell my students a comma is like a yield sign, a period is like a stop sign. That's an analogy that I use to explain a grammatical principle. Here's another example. I took this from Wikipedia. This is a description of the gulper eel. It's a deep sea fish. And the description says its most notable attribute is the large mouth. The eel's mouth is loosely hinged and can be opened wide enough to swallow an animal much larger than itself. The hapless fish is then deposited into a pouch-like lower jaw, which resembles that of a pelican. This giant mouth gives the eel its other common name of umbrella mouth, gulper. The eel also has a very long whip-like tail. The gulper eel, ... You'll notice that I've underlined and placed in bold the analogies. Basically, this is what the description says. Hinge plus pouch plus umbrella plus pelican plus whip equals gulper eel. And when you look at those pictures, although it seems a little silly, that really is a good description. So why does the non-technical audience matter? Well, the non-technical audience could include some of your customers. If, for example, you're working in auto repair, I can pretty much guarantee you that you know more about the car than the person who's come to your shop. After all, if they knew as much as you did, they probably have fixed their own car. As you progress in your education, it's also likely that you'll have supervisors, bosses, who don't know your job as well as you do. You may understand the equipment that you use much better than the person who is supervising you, and so it's your responsibility to be able to describe that equipment and any problems that arise or ideas you have for improvement. You've got to be able to describe that to your boss. You may also find that regulatory bodies that govern your trade contain people who are non-technical. They don't know the specifics of what you do, even though they are in charge to some degree to regulating your industry. So you've got to be able to talk to all these people. So what does this description look like? What does it read like? Well, one thing to keep in mind, no matter who you're writing for, whether it's a technical, semi-technical, or non-technical audience, is the order in which you describe things. So you've figured out who your audience is, you've decided what level of technicality or specificity they need. If it's a non-technical audience, you've figured out what analogies or metaphors you're going to use to help them understand the concept. Now you've got to put it on paper. And you've got to put it on paper in a way that makes sense. So there are a couple different ways you can order your description. You can describe things in spatial order. So for example, if I was describing a room, I could start at the floor and describe my way up to the ceiling, or vice versa. On the flip side, you might describe an object in order of importance. Maybe it's a piece of equipment and it's got 5 parts. One part is very important, one part is somewhat important, and the other 3 parts are not that important at all. It probably makes sense to describe the most important part first and work your way down to the least important. If you've got something that happens or that is revealed bit by bit, perhaps like a procedure, you could describe in order of appearance. What does someone see first, or what happens first? You could describe in order of use. What part will someone use first? Or you could describe one item in relation to another item. There's no one right answer. The thing you don't want to do, though, is just write a random grab bag of sentences and put them all together without thinking about what order they come in. So I should be able to ask you, hey, how did you order your description? There's no right answer, except that you have to have an answer. I want to know why item 1 came first and why item 10 came last. Let's practice that. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see a picture of a fish tank. Fancy fish tank. I wish I had this in my room. And I have included 7 descriptions that relate to this fish tank, but I've put them in a random order. So pause the screen, look at these 7 items, and organize them in order of importance. Make item 1 the most important feature of this fish tank and item 7 the least. When you're ready, hit play and we'll compare our answers. All right, take a moment, maybe pause the screen, and look at the order I've placed these items in. Answers may vary, but if you said that the drawer pulls were the most important feature of this fish tank, I'd say that's probably wrong. On the flip side, if you said that the height and breadth of the fish tank or the curved arch in the tank were not very important features, again, I'd say, that's not true. That's kind of what it is. That's the big part. So your answers may vary, but they should look somewhat like this. Let's try another one. You ordered the one on the left, but you got the one on the right. How are you going to describe the difference to the customer service representative you've got on the phone? Let's pretend that there are no part numbers. You can't tell them you ordered part 2532 and got 6984. Just describe the object in front of you in relation to the one that you actually wanted. Pause your screen, write that down, and I'll give you my answer. All right, so I said I wanted a hubcap with 21 spokes set at regular intervals. I got one with 10 spokes set in pairs of 2 with a larger distance between pairs than between spokes in a pair. In conclusion, we've discussed the fact that before you write your description, you must think about your audience. Think about what they do know and what they don't know. Tailor your description to meet their needs. Next, think very carefully about the order in which you want to include your descriptive items. Finally, because description is complex, it's usually best to write descriptions in complete sentences.